Itamar, we will move immediately to the lecture of Dr. Eliezer Papo. Eliezer Papo is a senior lecturer, Department for Hebrew Literature at Ben Gurion University in Beersheba in Israel. He is also the head of the Moshe David Gaon Center for Ladino Studies or Ladino Culture at Ben Gurion University. He focuses in his studies and in his academic career on the Spanish Jewry, literature and culture, etc. Main focus is after the expulsion, that is to say after the 15th century expulsion of Jewish Jewry from the Iberian Peninsula. And Eliezer, please.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll speak about the trans-Mediterranean nature of the Sephardic culture. Now, what you can see here is the list of what's called today a Red de las Juderías. In other words, the association of those cities in Spain which had medieval Jewish communities. So there are 24. Now, not all medieval Jewish communities are preserved, and to this association belong only those cities who have the Jewish quarter preserved. There were many other Jewish communities in those times in Spain. However, though, for the sake of my lecture, this is a very good illustration because it shows you that out of 24, overwhelming majority of Jewish neighborhoods, Jewish communities, were continental, not Mediterranean. You can see from all of this, right? Estella, Calahorra, Tarazona, right? Then some of them, like Barcelona, are on the seaside. But then again, Girona is not. And then again, Segovia and Avila and Toledo, right? And not to speak about Cordova and so on. So basically, Spanish Jewry or Iberian Jewry before the expulsion was quite continental one. The Jews engaged in mostly, continental professions, not necessarily more sea-related professions. 1492, the expulsion of the Jews and the total breakup with this way of life. The new virtual entity established after the expulsion, what we can simply call virtual Sepharad, is totally Mediterranean entity. The new Sephardic communities, the new communities of expulsees were established mostly around the Mediterranean Sea. You can, if I'm already using a metaphor, right, of a state, if I'm already metaphorically ascribing statehood to this entity, calling it virtual Sepharad, then the virtual capital of virtual Sepharad would be a port city in Ottoman Empire at that moment, and today in Greece, Salonika, right? It was called by the Sephardim La Repubblica Judea, Jewish Republic. Now, creation of virtual Sepharad. Obviously, people left, most of the people, those who didn't opt for Portugal, they left Spain via Mares, right? They left Spain through the sea. So they came to different places in North Africa, in Italy, but mostly in the Ottoman Empire. Now we will see that during the first 100 years, this scattered community, within which many a time the families were scattered. The one same family went to two or three different places. They were striving to create a new identity. Actually, to proceed their whole identity in new conditions. So when you try to proceed your previous identity in new conditions, you basically create something new. And that identity was based on three cornerstones: the sea, the language, and the law. Now, the sea, that's obvious, and I will jump through few slides so that I can show you something. For example, over here, you see one of the synagogues in Fez, right? And it's called the synagogue Al-Fasigin, What does that mean, the synagogue Al-Fasiyin? Al-Fasiyin in Arabic means people of faith. So aren't all synagogues in Fez synagogues of people in Fez? Obviously not, because other synagogues were established by the Sephardic newcomers, and they were referring to the local synagogue as the synagogue of the people of Fez. You can see, for example, that when they established synagogues as south in Morocco as Marrakesh, the synagogue is called La Azama, in other words, Gerouche, in other words, expulsion. So this is the synagogue established by the expulsees. And there were many quarrels and many wars between the Toshavim, the original Moroccan Jews, and the Megorashim, the expulsees, the people who came from Spain. However, though, in 17th century, this synagogue functions only by a name, few family names, and few costumes that are preserved to the people, by the people who pray in that synagogue. But they don't speak Ladino anymore, and they don't belong to what we would call today Mediterranean, Ladino-speaking Sephardic mentality. So what I'm trying to argue is that basically Sephardim came to many different places, but only those places who could keep permanent contact with other Sephardic communities around the sea, those proceeded being Sephardic until yesterday. Sephardic not only in costumes, Sephardic not only in second names, but Sephardic also in their daily language, Sephardic in their basically language is what defines you. If you speak Judeo-Spanish, then that's the cornerstone of your identity. So, the sea. What I'm trying to say is that all those communities, even if the numbers of the expulsees were big enough to establish how would you call it, a separate synagogue, within 100 or 200 years they ceased to be part of the Sephardic International. The other cornerstone is the language. Now, the same way we can't say today that Jews in America are speaking Junglish or Jewish English, but rather they are all speaking American English, and then people in Alabama speak it with Alabama accent, and people in New York speak it with New York accent. So the same was true about Jews in Spain. There was no such a thing. I mean, you really need to be nationalist to chauvinist in order to claim that there was Judeo-Spanish before the expulsion. The Jews of, I mean, for God's sake, the Jews of Catalonia spoke Catalan, the Jews of Portugal spoke Portuguese, the Jews of Andalusia spoke Arabic, later only the Jews of Granada, the Jews of Castilla spoke Castilian. Now, each of them spoke the language of his area. That's so normal. And then, just like any American Jew today can say to his wife, darling, would you like to make the Kiddush in the Sukkah or inside? The Jews in Spain would use Hebrew words. But that doesn't constitute a different language, not even a different dialect. Jews spoke local dialects with specific Jewish touch. Just like the Jews of New York don't speak a different language, the Jews of Toledo didn't speak a different language. Okay, so what happened is, if all the Jews of Toledo were to move to Salonika, and all the Jews of Barcelona were to move to Istanbul, and all the Jews of Girona were to move to Izmir, the preservation of their previous identities and languages would be very easy. But the problem was that there was a huge mixture of languages. A few people from Barcelona, a few people from Girona, a few people from Toledo, a few people from Cordova, and I'm just throwing names, came to Istanbul. And the same, few people from here, few people from there, came to Salonika. So in all these cities to which expulsees came immediately in 1492, you could see that they've established different synagogues, different communities, based on the country of origin. So we would have Cal Aragon, the community of Aragon, Cal Castilla, Cal Portugal. Now, during the first decades, each of them had their own rabbis, their own beddin, their own hazanim, their own liturgy, their own language. However, though, within the first 100 years after the expulsion, all the communities, there was a linguistic unification. And everybody opted for no, not everybody opted. Gradually developed the language that we call today Judeo-Spanish. The base of that language is Español anteclásico or Castellano anteclásico, but with Portuguese and Catalan and Valencian and Aragonese words. But the grammar, the structure, the deep structure of the language is Castilian. And this is similar to what happened in the New World, because Spain conquered the New World, and the governors of different provinces in the New World were coming from all over the Spain, right? But the main language was Castilian, not Aragonese, not Valencian, not whatever, right? Okay. So what happened is, Judeo-Spanish was created in the Ottoman Empire on base of Castilian, but the dialectal differences were preserved. Not necessarily by speaking a different language, but by speaking the same Judeo-Spanish differently. For example, where I originally come from, I was born in Sarajevo, the Judeo-Spanish is pronounced the Portuguese way. Consequently, you have that every inaccentuated E becomes E. You have that every inaccentuated O becomes O. So instead of querido, you would say querido. And that's the same way that people speak in Portugal. Right, so what does that mean? That means that the bulk of the community at the beginning were people of Portuguese origin. When they switched to Judeo-Spanish, when they switched to Castilian, they actually proceeded speaking it the way they spoke Portuguese previously. For example, you can have the people of Monastir, right, in present-day Macedonia, they convert every final A into E. So a sentence like, tengo una hija casada que vive en Najaria, se llama Susana, they would say, tengo una hija casada que vive en Najaria, se llama Susana. Every single A at the end becomes E. This preserves, it seems to be, the way of speaking in Extremadura, and so on. Now, the third column of Sephardic identity, the C, the language, and the law, halakhical unification. Immediately after the expulsion, the biggest minds amongst the Sephardic Chachamim understood that there is a huge problem with having so many different interpretations of the Jewish law. Now, while the Jews lived in Spain, they had illusion of being one nation, one religion, and having one law. Once they lived next to each other, they recognized how different they are. And people would not eat from the food of other people, and they would not marry each other, and they would not consider each other's marital contracts to be binding, and so on. So, how do you provide halakhical unity? Rabbi Yaakov Berav came with the idea of re-establishing the Sanhedrin. It didn't work. It didn't work mostly because the rabbinic mafia didn't like the idea, because that would mean 70 people with secured job and everybody else is just a clerk. So they just didn't like the idea. Then Rabbi Yosef Karo was looking into the reasons offered by rabbinic elite why Mishneh Torah, Maimonides' Codex of Jewish Law, was not accepted. And since always people claim that's because Maimonides didn't have footnotes. So he writes a book, Footnotes to Maimonides. It's called Kesef Mishneh. Footnotes to Maimonides. And then the rabbinic elite says, oh, you shouldn't have bothered. Which means that wasn't the problem to start with. Then he recognized that the only Bet Din, the only rabbinical court that the rabbinical elite will accept, can be the court of dead rabbis. Because living rabbis will not accept the authority of other living rabbis. There were three different traditions amongst the expulsees. The Christian North, represented by Rabbeinu Asher, Rosh, and his son, the author of Arba'ah HaTurim. The southern one, represented by Maimonides, and accepted also in the Orient. And then the southern one, pre-Maimonidean, which is identified with Al-Fasi, Rabbi Yitzchak Al-Fasi, and with North Morocco. So basically, Rabbi Yosef Karo was trying to make possible integration within the expulsees and between the expulsees and the people living in the Middle East, followers of the Maimonides, and living in the North Africa, followers of Al-Fasi. Right? So he says, I will take a book, Arba'ah Turim, I will check every single law in that book and I will run it by three authorities. By Rabbenu Asher, by Maimonides, and by Al-Fasi. And we will go by the majority opinion. Interestingly enough, this was accepted, and this is how Shulchan Aruch was created. Shulchan Aruch was basically created to facilitate integration of the expulsees amongst themselves and within the local communities in North Africa and Middle East. The Ashkenazim saw this, and then one great Ashkenazi rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Serles, said, oh, this is a huge opportunity. Let's join the train. So he wrote his own commentaries to Shulchan Aruch, and this brought about integration of the entire Jewish people. So, the main question then is, virtual Sepharad, is it a telesocracy? Did it have territorial unity? Does it have continuity, integrity? Now, these are the pictures that we previously saw. So I want to, we already spoke about the linguistic unification. This is the halakhic unification, the Sanhedrin didn't work, the Beit Din, the rabbinical court of three rabbis. Now I want to bring you just one example of to what extent the Ladino-speaking Sephardim, which are not to be mixed with Oriental Sephardim, the Ladino-speaking Sephardim, they lived around the sea. Just like Venetians, they crossed the sea on every single occasion, on daily basis. I will use an example of one single rabbinic family that I've been doing research on. That's the Pardo family. Okay, so obviously you can see from the second name that they are coming from Spain. They moved from Spain to Salonika. From Salonika they moved to Sarajevo. Then Rabbi Yaakov Pardo, the father of famous Rabbi David Pardo, moves to Dubrovnik, to Ragusa, right on the Adriatic Sea. Well, he dies. His wife sends his child, Rabbi David, to Venezia. So he learns in Venetia. He acquires the title of the rabbi. He returns to Spalato, to Split, right? So he crosses the Adriatic, right? Then from Split to Sarajevo. Then from Sarajevo he goes to Livorno to print his books, to Venezia to print his books, and then finally he goes to Jerusalem. Now you have to understand that Beersheba and Jerusalem, Yafo and Tel Aviv, Sarajevo and Istanbul and Izmir and Adrianopolis, they were all in the same state. So just like today in United States, Jews would go to Philadelphia or to California when they get retired. Most of Sarajevo, for example, I'm from Sarajevo, most of Sarajevo rabbis are not buried in Sarajevo. Not even, I don't believe a single one is buried in Sarajevo. They are all buried in Jerusalem. Why? Because it was all one state and they would just move to Jerusalem. It's holy, better climate, right, and cheaper life. So, now you can see. Oh, that's Ottoman Empire. Obviously, I'm speaking about the Ottoman Empire. Now you can see, this guy had three sons, Rabbi David Pardo. His son, Chacham Yaakov, was the chief rabbi of Dubrovnik. The other son, Chacham Yitzchak, was the chief rabbi of Sarajevo. Another son, Chacham Abraham, was not the chief rabbi, but he was one of the rabbis in Jerusalem. Now, the last one, Abraham Pardo, was married to Levana Azulai. Now, Levana Azulai is daughter of this guy, right? Hida, Chaim Yosef David Azulai. Again, family comes from Morocco. He died in Livorno. For most of his life, he was Shadar, the emissary of the rabbis in Palestine or in Israel, and he was going around the Jewish world and collecting money, mostly around the Mediterranean. So you can see how the rabbinical Sephardic elite functioned as one single elite across the sea. You have the rabbi coming from Spain to Salonika, from Salonika to Sarajevo, from Sarajevo going to Venezia, from Venezia returning to Sarajevo, from Sarajevo going to Jerusalem. His son gets married with the daughter of a Moroccan rabbi who lives in Livorno, right? Then the brother of the bride, right, is married to the daughter of this guy, right? Rabbi, what's his name? Yeah. Chacham Salomon Salem, again, born in the Trinopolis, chief rabbi of Amsterdam. Chief rabbi, oh yes, sorry, you don't see the same picture. Chief rabbi of Amsterdam. And you can see how Dutch he looks, right? Okay, so you could also see that Jews played a major role in development of ports on the Mediterranean. For example, one converso Jew comes to Split, and he is the sole responsible person for building the Split Scala, right, and converting it into an international port. Now, if we compare the Sephardic, and again, I'm speaking about the Ladino-speaking Sephardim, I'm not speaking about Oriental Jews. If we take the Sephardic model, we see that it is Mediterranean model. If we compare it to Ashkenazi model of development of communities, we can see that, and I'm not an expert for Ashkenazi Judaism, but what I can see as a non-expert from the outside is that Ashkenazi Judaism develops around the rivers. So you can see how within 100 years there is a satellite of the community down the river or up the river, because Jews dealt with commerce and they lived on river, and then the commerce would proceed up or down or whatever. Now for the Sephardim it was not the rivers, and those who went 10 or more hours away from the sea, they lost the connection, they lost the language, they lost the identity. Only those people who were within day walking distance from a sea, right? They proceeded being part of this network that we today called virtual Sepharad. So, to make a long story short and to make a nice joke for the end, the Telassocentric Sephardic culture versus the Ashkenazi river-centered culture, and as a peak, Tel Aviv, an Ashkenazi city on a river called Mediterranean Sea. Now, why on a river? Because in every single Mediterranean Sea, all main streets go to the port, right? Now, in any river-based city, all main streets are parallel to the river. Now, Tel Aviv was built by Ashkenazim who were new to the Mediterranean area, so they built the city as if the Mediterranean Sea was a river. So all main streets are parallel to the sea. Consequently, you can't breathe in the city. Now, what's happening today is that other cities in Israel, which were developed after Tel Aviv, obviously developed just like normal Mediterranean cities, with main streets going to the sea. So what I'm trying to say is that there is a huge Mediterraneization of Israeli population. Whether these are Oriental Jews coming from the inland, whether these are Ashkenazi Jews coming from the Eastern Europe or Central Europe, they all came to a Mediterranean country, and now they all are eating Mediterranean food. Not too many Israelis are serving goulash on a daily basis. And then all of them are basically more and more open to Mediterranean music. So if you would listen Israeli music in 50s, 60s, it was Russian music with Hebrew words. If you listen to Israeli music today, it's Mediterranean music with Hebrew words. Punchline, and to make a long story short, even though the Sephardim were the tiniest group within the network of Jewish nation, it was the Sephardic way of Hebrew that was accepted in Israel as normative, not the Ashkenazi. That's why in Israel you don't say Shabbos, and you don't say Sukkot, and you don't say Shulam, and not the Oriental. That's why you don't say in Israel Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Sevaot, right? But you say Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai Sevaot. So, the only community that didn't make difference between K and Ko, that didn't make difference between Ha, Ch, and H, Ha and Ch. The only community that didn't pronounce Aleph and He at all were the Mediterranean Sephardim, and everybody in Israel today speaks like the Sephardic minority. Now, the thing is, this was not too conscious a decision. It was just too obvious for the creators or recreators of the modern Hebrew that the language should not be too Oriental, because it would be impossible for the newcomers from Europe to speak with po, so, po, and all of that. And on the other side, it shouldn't be too Ashkenazi because it's too diaspora related. Subconsciously, half-consciously, bit consciously, they opted for the Mediterranean Hebrew, and that was the founding stone of our present developing Mediterranean identity as a country and as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Liturgical Ladino and the Ladino of the Tanakh. The Tanakh is translated into Ladino. So these are published books in Ladino, and some of them are quite early. I agree with you, and I like your distinction about the dialects, the Judeo-Spanish and all of that. But I think there's a difference with the published, the printed part. And of course, that also changed because later there was Ma'am Moaz and those big works coming out of Salonika being published. So that's one question. How is that different? And the second question is about the migration out of Spain, because we always have 1492, for the expulsion-edict, and then we have 1497 out of Portugal, their expulsion-edict. But actually, even in my own family, there were ways. There were conversos, Dona Gracia and Joseph Hanesi. They came out in the 1600s from Iberia to Greece and Turkey. So I think we forget there were ways also, and that must have changed language and things. And still in Turkey, and especially in Greece, my friend of blessed memory, Nikos Stavroulakis, wrote about all the synagogues in Greece. And some of them have the name Puglia, which is Apulia in Italy. And they have names of place names in Spain. So some of these, there was a blending and mixing, of course, in Izmir, the Portuguese synagogue. So there was still some sense of, even after several hundred years, where the ancestors had come from that specific locale.
Okay, well, quite a question. Concerning the first one, there is nothing spoken about the way the liturgical texts were translated into Judeo-Spanish. Why? Because they were translated with total grammatical and syntactical subjugation to Hebrew original, and I'll just give two examples, hoping that everybody can follow. For example, the snake that appears already in the first chapter of the Bible, the snake in Hebrew is masculine. Now, the snake in Spanish is culebra, which is feminine. But then, a Jewish reader would lose all kind of rabbinic associations of sex between the snake and Hava and Eve. Consequently, it was translated into Ladino as El Culebro, right? Which totally abrogates the rules of Spanish language. Or another example, not necessarily from the Bible, but from the Haggadah, the Passover liturgical text. So you would say, in Aramaic, you would say, in Hebrew, you would say, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh. How different is this night? Now, in Semitic languages, you would add, ha-layla, ha-zeh. The night, the this. Now, in English, obviously, you cannot say, how different is the night, the this. Right? You say, how different is this night? Now, in Ladino translation, in total abrogation of grammar rules, and syntactical rules, you would say, Quanto fue dimudada la noche la esta. How different was the night, the this. So, that's not the way the Sephardim spoke. That's the way the Sephardim translated their books, because unlike Christian translations of Hebrew original, Jewish translations were not displacement translation. They were interlinear translations. They were not meant to displace the original text. They were rather meant to help you cope with the original text. That's the first. Wait.
Sephicha calls that a calque from Hebrew.
Yes, exactly. Sephicha calls that a calque. Now, concerning your second question, yes, there were waves. And for some communities, the waves never stopped. For example, if you take in consideration the Spanish and Portuguese community in Upper West Side Manhattan, they still accept people coming from the New World on claim that they are of converso origins. Now, for the Ottoman world, someplace in 17th, 18th century, they stopped accepting people who were claiming, oh, we are. But again, fortunately enough, one family of conversos was well accepted. and this was Herzl family. Nobody is aware that Herzls are not Herzls but rather labels. Yeah, Herzl, the founder of the Zionism and Jewish national movement and so on. So his family has a second name which sounds very Ashkenazi, very Eastern European. But Herzl family is actually label, and labels were Amaro, and Amaro were Amar, and they are coming from two Catholic priests who came from Spain first to Holland and then to Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, the same way the Christians differentiate between the old Christians and new Christians, right? And in order to obtain a public place, a public job in Spain, you needed to prove that you were of old Christian stock, right? And that's the reason why in Spain until today everybody has two second names, because they needed to prove that their mothers are also not of converso origin. And then applying to any kind of public function, you would put González, Martinez, Filipez, Martinez, Martinez, whatever is, proving that 3, 4, 5 generation. Okay, so but the Sephardim did the same thing, and most of the people are not aware of this. When a Sephardic rabbi signs, he puts his name, and after that he puts Sephardi Tahor, which means a pure Sephardic. Now, pure Sephardic is not against Ashkenazim, because then they would say pure Jews and other Jews are impure. But no, pure Sephardic means that there are other Sephardic who are not pure, and these were Sephardic who were baptized. So the Sephardi Tahor is basically internal Sephardic discrimination between those who came out in 1492 and those who accepted baptism and then kept coming out of Spain in 16th and 17th century.
The explanation that I heard from Jerusalem veteran Sephardics that the letters Samestet are actually not Sephardi Tahor but Siman Tov or Sof Tov,
yeah.
It's totally false.
Oh, it's totally false, and it's influenced by modern Zionism. In modern Zionist narrative, it's totally unacceptable, right, to face some kind of internal Jewish racism. So, this Sameftet, right, which means Sephardi Tahor, is now reinterpreted by the Sephardim in Israel as if it meant, may my end be good, or may all of this happen in a good sign. But this is no case, and all the Sephardim living outside of Israel proceed the old tradition, and not in Israel, Zionism created a new tradition.
Yes, please.
Well, I would like to make a remark, first of all, that Professor Papo's speech was brilliant. I find a lot of relations between the Sephardic traditions in the Mediterranean and the traditions developed by the Christian communities, which we call Levantines, which are members of the family on every port on the Eastern Mediterranean. And now, Professor Mahmadi's speech, I find it very interesting your establishment of a relation between the minorities in Greece and Israel, because I remember from my own study the treaty signed by the Patriarch of the London Church, Monsignor Alida, with the Jewish Agency in 1947, I think, whereby he as Patriarch of the Mormons, as representative of the community, recognized the legitimacy of the Jewish establishment in Palestine. And I think this tradition of minority alliances in the Middle East goes a long time in the past.
From the 1940s, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But you mentioned something concerning the Levantine. I mean, when I will not elaborate on it, but just to mention one thing. The perception of the Jewish Yeshuv, that is to say, what predated the establishment of the state in 1948, i.e. from the end of the 19th century up to the mid-20th century, something like 50 years. The perception of the area of the Mediterranean was part a perception of the Levant, and the Levant was looked at, in ambivalent terminology. It was so-called the backyard of Europe. It was the Levant, time is not time, a word is not a word, and some other, so-called non-Western codes and characteristics. So probably for next year in Sorrento, I will produce how the Levant was perceived, because to perceive Greece was perceived as part of the Levant. Okay? Greece was perceived, Western Europe perceived Greece as part of the Balkans. Okay? Even nowadays, when you ask Europeans, they will tell you Greece has introduced the Balkans into the EU. And Greece says we introduced Europe into the Balkans. Okay? This separation between Greece and the rest of Europe is something not necessarily artificial. Up to 2 generations ago, old Greeks, or let's say middle-aged Greeks in the 1950s or something like this, when they boarded a plane in Athens on its way to London or Paris or Berlin, they would have said, "Sapao stin Evropi," I go to Europe. Okay, you see, you board a plane in Athens and you go to London and I go to Europe. So this separation between Greece and the rest of Europe is something that has got roots. And probably the membership in the EU, people expected that membership in the EU would have banished this separation. But then came the crisis in the 2010 onwards, the financial crisis, and I believe that perceptions in Europe, in Brussels, vis-à-vis Greece, are again not necessarily flattering perceptions.
Here I have to add something from a very Mediterranean perspective. It looks that all Mediterranean countries, not only Greece, don't take them seriously as European countries, because in internal narrative in Spain, we will also hear a lot. This could never happen in a European country, right? And then in Italy, they would never say this would never happen in a European country, but they say this would never happen in a civilized country. And then a civilized country basically means Germany.
Of course.
Yeah.
I can vouch for that. Whenever someone says, we don't say it's an order from the European Union. We say it's an order from Europe.
Yeah.
Or we are going to Europe. And we have a lot of internalized self-hatred, and we say, well, Europe ends in the Pyrenees. That's very.
Can I? Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Please.
A question for
me.
Mr.
Okay.
First, I would apologize for the lack of leadership and cultural ignorance and disrespect of the current administration, American administration, coming to your country. But my question is this, and you may or may not be able to answer this. Given the fact that Israel and Greece are currently under this incredible pressure from countries that believe that they are economically stronger, I'm not sure that they are. Secondly, from countries that are going through this notion of nationalism, how do you see this playing out in Greece and Israel, let's say, over the next 10, 15 years?
Yes, when you talk, another common denominator that was not mentioned today by me was the issue of immigration. In both countries, both in Israel, illegal immigration that comes mainly from Africa to Israel, okay, we somehow managed to curb it and even to stop it by building a fence. Not very many knows about it, or know about it. 250 kilometers fence, 10 meters or 8 meters high, was built on the Sinai Peninsula, on the border between us and Egypt, in order to curb the stream of Eritreans and Ethiopians and Africans into Israel. Up till now, this is one issue. Without judging concerning immigration, whether it's good or not, whether they authentically escape from extermination, this and that. I just mentioned. The same thing applies for Greece. 80% of illegal immigrations that comes nowadays to the EU pass via Greece. From Turkey into Greece and then to the rich shared countries into the EU. 80%. Now, about 1 million have already remained in Greece. Greece, without offending anybody here, by European bodies concerning of civil rights and this and that, they label Greece as #1 xenophobic country in the EU. So you ask concerning whether nationalism or probably ultranationalism is going to develop, but I think that neither Israel nor Greece are that different from the rest of the world. I don't think that, have you seen Trump last night concerning withdrawing from the Paris Agreement?
Insanity.
Okay, so America First. America First was mentioned, I believe, 3 or 4 times in the speech. Okay, America First.
This is again a lack of cultural intelligence, to put it bluntly. And people may disagree with me, but that's my opinion. So to figure out problems, and this panel, by the way, I think all 3 of you have been incredibly enlightening for me, who's someone who's interested in this. The complexity of the situation is never going to be understood by the current administration. So you people have nothing to worry about.
But this is not new.
They're going to do nothing.
If you think Clinton's understood better, I mean, you are totally wrong. Hillary single-handedly destroyed Libya, so...
Okay. Yes. Here's the question, and then another one, or the last one? The last one, please. Shaul Bartal from Bar-Ilan University.
Yeah, I think that Israel become more Mediterranean state because not only because political changes, and also we have to remind that 60% of the Jewish population originally belonged to the Jewish indigenous communities of the Middle East. And this, during the years since the founding of Israel, changing the atmosphere in Israel to be more Mediterranean.
And allow me to add something what you just said. When time and again you are being faced with the so-called blame that we are a foreign element in the Middle East. Our history is Middle Eastern, our language is Semitic, 60% of our population originate in Middle Eastern countries. So we are not
foreign body.
Exactly foreign body.
I wanted to add something about the self-depreciation. It's typical of all Mediterraneans, but speaking in Sephardic context, right now I'm teaching Sephardic literature, but before that I was teaching the language. So in order to help young Israeli students understand what Ladino is all about, I would always bring some elders to the first classes in order for the young students to see that I'm not inventing. There is such a thing as Judeo-Spanish and some people spoke it. And then always, when we would have the first contacts, they would always say, oh, of course, Latinos, that's the language of our fathers and of our mothers and of our grandparents, and we have to preserve it. As soon as they enter the university and they come to the class, they say, oh, I don't know why Eliezer invited me, because in my home we didn't really speak Ladino. And then they all go to claim that at their home they spoke French. At their home they spoke whatever, some kind of, highly esteemed language, but not Ladino. That would be too Levantine for their family. So they always say, we spoke Ladino with my grandmother who was uneducated, or something like that. But, but with their parents, they spoke French.
It was soft spots. It was the idea that French was, if you were going to move up in society, you have to spoke and how that's whole thing. But this is the language of our mothers, the Judeo-Spanish. So there's a kind of ambivalence in those families because at the same time it's your first language that you remember from your childhood. And it's very special to remember it, that there's that ambivalence.
Of course.
To people who don't know you, you want them to think you're educated and elite, not working class.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the Levantine self-depreciation.
May I thank you all for coming? Thank you very much. I'll explain to you. He told me what do I have to do? Okay, like this. And by this I finish with this quotation. The following is an incredible interview with Shinar. Shinar is the architect who was hired by the government to do something, to connect together Haifa and the Mediterranean, okay? That Shinar describes the poor and broken connection between Israeli towns and the Mediterranean. The first thing is, and I read the quotation, the first thing is, in the replanning of Haifa's waterfront and connecting the town to the port, was to persuade the railroad authorities to build a sunken railway instead of a ground-level tracks that separates the town from the port. A train that goes from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, will somebody dare to cut through and level out mountains instead of digging a tunnel through them and laying the tracks inside it? Surely nobody will dare to do so. And this is the reason why presently an almost 30-kilometer long tunnel is being built for the use of train that goes from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. However, in Haifa, a city of 300,000 people, the rail tracks separate the water from the city, and everybody accepts this abnormality. In the new plan to connect Haifa to the sea, we left a middle option to build the bridges over the train tracks, because we knew that building sunken rail tracks was an option which could not be taken lightly. So I am glad that we managed to persuade them to build a sunken railway. But Shinar continues. The situation that presently prevails in Haifa is not greatly different from what exists in other Israeli towns. The last thing that you could say about these towns, says Shinar, is that they are Mediterranean towns. Haifa really does not look like Piraeus, or at least for the moment doesn't resemble it. Where are we and where is the Mediterranean Sea, laments Shinar. We are so much separate from the Mediterranean atmosphere, and it is particularly so in our towns. Apart from Tel Aviv, that somehow, but only just reaches the sea, none of our towns reaches the sea. This is an unbelievable phenomenon. I really fail to comprehend it. Why? Why run away from the sea when you could cling to it in like every other normal Mediterranean town? I finish. Towns were planned and designed here in Israel that are separated from the sea. Take, for example, Ashkelon. It is a nice place, but it too turns its back to the sea, as if the sea is unimportant. In Ashdod, the situation is even worse. In Israel, a town engineer or a town planner is actually an urban mender and repairer. He has to repair what was spoiled for 60 years. Thank you very much. 20 years ago, in 1948, when the State of Israel was established, when the founders of the state opened an outlet to the Great Sea, it was already then a defiance to Mother Nature. Imagine, okay, thank God we have a seashore, and it was perceived then a defiance to Mother Nature. A defiance to the very creation, okay? The most puzzling procurement acquired by the Jewish nation, which later became Israel, was the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, I've got something above sea, but under the sea, what have you got to